All right, this video is going to cover Chapter 6 of Improving Vocabulary Skills. I encourage you to go ahead and get your book open and follow along, and you can mark down your answers in there. So let's take a look at these words first and take a guess at the parts of speech. So our first word is concurrent. Next one, confiscate. That's 8 sound at the end. Constitute. Decipher. Default. Hypothetical. There's an AL at the end. Nominal. Again, AL at the end. Predominant. The ANT is also sort of a clue. Prerequisite. And then recession. And that SION is a clue for us. So our first word here is concurrent. And this is an adjective. Concurrent with the closing of the steel mill was the opening of a new toy factory. Laid off from the mill jobs, found jobs at the new factory. Having mistakenly registered for 2 concurrent classes, Joe had to drop one of them and choose a course that met at a different time. So concurrent means happening at the same time. For those of you who were in level 2, there's also the word coincide, and some of you may know that word. And coincide's a verb, meaning to happen at the same time. Concurrent is an adjective with a similar meaning that it is happening, describing something that happens at the same time as something else. So in the first example, you're talking about two things happening at the same time. The closing of one factory and the opening of another one. In the second example, you're talking about the 2 things that are happening at the same time, or the classes, the concurrent classes. They're happening during the same time, so that he can't take most of them. Another way to think about this is the word simultaneous, right? Simultaneous has that same meaning of 2 things that are happening together, or not necessarily together, but together at the same time. So our next word here is confiscate, and this one is a verb, and that 8 sound at the end is a clue for us that it's a verb. Hand him over, my father said, just as we were really starting to have fun. He confiscated our entire supply of water balloons. The Chinese drug agents once confiscated $2 million worth of heroin that had been wrapped in plastic and inserted into live goldfish. The agents seized the drugs as they were being sent out of the country. So confiscate means to take possession of. Now confiscate, and you can see in both of these situations, confiscates means that an authority is taking possession of, or taking control of. So in the first example, the authority is the father, right? Is the authority in the family, or obviously the mother. In the second one, the authority is the government drug agents, right? The Chinese drug agents are the authorities. So the meaning of confiscate does mean to take possession of, but it means to take possession of with authority. One of the things when I taught in high school, sometimes we would confiscate students' cell phones, right? Meaning that at that point I was a teacher, and a high school teacher had authority over the students in the class, and were able to take over their cell phones. So the important thing about this confiscate, meaning that it's taking control of something, but you're allowed to take control of it because you're authority. So for example, if you just steal your friend's cell phone, that's not confiscating, that's stealing. You have to be an authority to confiscate. And don't worry, I'm not going to take anybody's cell phone. Our next word here is constitute, and this one is a verb. In my opinion, a good movie, a pizza, and animated conversation constitute a perfect night out. 12 business and professional people constitute the board of directors of the women's shelter. Among other things, they help raise funds for the shelter. So constitute means to form. So constitute means to form, but means to, when we talk about constituting something, it means forming and making a whole, right? So a word you may know that's related to this is the Constitution. And so the U.S. Constitution, or any Constitution, is written because what it does is it makes the government whole, or it sets out sort of the basic rules for the government. Obviously, there's more to the government than just the Constitution, but it basically makes, forms in a sense. In order to form the government, you have to have you need to have some sort of constitution. In this case, though, when we use the word constitute, what we're saying is to be a part of a whole, right? So in the first example, we're saying a good movie, a pizza, and animated or exciting conversation. All of those things together are part of a perfect night, right? So together they make a perfect night. In the second example, we're saying that these 12 people together, when they come together, they form, or they make the board of directors, or the head of this women's shelter. Another word that is synonymous with this is the word compose, right? To put together. Our next word here is decipher, and this is also a verb. Even though it ends in ER, it doesn't always work. Why do contracts have to use language that's so difficult to decipher? If your teacher can't decipher your handwriting, you'll need to write your papers on a computer. What decipher means is to figure out, okay? But decipher means to figure out something that is complex, to understand something that is difficult to understand or difficult to read. So if you look at the picture there, right, that handwriting is difficult to decipher. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to understand the meaning of something. In the first example, contracts, especially like a cell phone contract, or if you ever when with your iPhone or your Apple products, whenever you get an update, there's this long contract where it just gives you a button saying, do you agree? And if you're like me, you never read that because it's so complex, because it's so difficult to decipher. It's hard to understand what they are actually saying. So another way to think about this is to succeed in understanding, interpreting, or identifying something. And that something that you're understanding or interpreting is difficult to understand, either because it's written in an unclear way, or because it's so complex, or maybe it's written intentionally in a coded language or something like that. So that makes it difficult to understand. Okay? Our next word here is default. Again, another verb. We won our case against the appliance repairman because he defaulted by failing to appear in court. Eli's mother said, I'll co-sign on your car loan, but if you have to make every payment. If you default, it'll hurt my credit rating. So what default means is to not do something that's required. And default is often used in like sort of like with banks. So if you borrow money from a bank, or if you buy a car and you get a loan, if you default, it means that you're not paying for however much it is that you have agreed to pay. But in general terms, it means that you're not following through, that you're not fulfilling an obligation. An obligation means a responsibility, something that you're told to do. So especially in terms of repaying a loan, so money that you borrowed, or also the need to appear in court. So that's the first example, in a court of law. So some synonyms like non-payment, that's the not paying would be a synonym. Fail to pay, back out of. These are other synonyms that mean the same thing as default. So our next one here is hypothetical, and this one is an adjective, and the AL tells us that. Imagine the hypothetical situation of going to live alone on an island. Which books and CDs would you take along? Law schools hold pretend court sessions with hypothetical cases so that students can practice their skills. So what hypothetical means is imaginary, and by that we mean it's not real, but it's possible. So when we say of a hypothetical situation, we're saying imagine if whatever happened, if this happened or if that happened. So that it's not a real thing. It's an imagined thing. Oftentimes we use the word hypothetical when we want people to think about a possible situation and consider what they might do in that situation. So the hypothetical situation is, if you were on a desert island, what would you bring? But also, in the second example, law schools have pretend court sessions with hypothetical cases. So basically, they're saying to these people who want to be lawyers, imagine that this was real. Imagine that this was real. What would you do, right? And this is the way that you get trained. The same thing happens with doctors, people who are training to be doctors. They say, imagine this is what you hear. What are you going to do? And it's a way of teaching. Hypothetical situations are a way of teaching people or allowing them to have practice doing something that they will be doing later on in life, but without the danger of making a big mistake and someone getting hurt. So you can imagine, if you were becoming a doctor, you could make, if you made a wrong decision, you could, end up killing someone. So it's important to have this kind of practice for those professions. They also do this a lot in business schools as well. So imagine you're running a company, and this is the situation. What are you going to do? It's to prepare people for the future. Our next word here is nominal, and this is an adjective. The AL gives us a clue at that. Except for a nominal registration fee, the camp for needy children is entirely free. Professor Banks gave us only nominal extra credit for participating in psychology experiments. She wanted our course grade to be based mainly on our test scores. So nominal means very little. Okay? So there's two ways to think about this word nominal. There's one way that's being addressed here, and there's another way that I'm just going to talk about because you may hear it at some point. But nominal in our sense here means when we're talking about a price or amount of money. So when we say that is nominal, we're saying that it's very little, very small amount, and also when you say something that there's a nominal price, it means it's not just very small, but it's like well below what something is really worth. So in the first example, it's saying a nominal registration fee, meaning that the amount of money that they end up paying is much less than the camp is actually worth. In the second example, nominal, it just means very, very, very little or a very small amount. But the other time that you may hear this word nominal is nominal can also mean in name only, right? So that for example, in countries where they have kings and queens, a lot of the time the roles are nominal only. So for example, in the United Kingdom, they have a queen, but it's sort of a nominal position, meaning that she's not really the head of the government. She doesn't have the power to control the government like in the past. In some other countries, the king or the queen is not nominal. So for example, in Saudi Arabia or in like where I used to live in Oman, they didn't have a king, but they had a sultan. So in that case, those people aren't nominal kings. It's not just only in name. So those are the two meanings, but the focus here is very little. All right, so our next one here is predominant, and this one is also an adjective. Rock is the predominant music on that radio station, but country music is also played. Although the predominant type of car in New York City in the 1900s used gasoline, a third of the cars ran on electricity. So predominant means the main or the majority of something. So the way I always think of this is that the way it looks like is like predominant, which actually doesn't really help. But if we do think of the word dominant means the thing that's on top, the things that it's in charge. So when we talk about predominant, we're talking about the majority, right? That not everything, but the largest in amount or number is the predominant. So we can think of it meaning in two ways. We can say the strongest or the main element, meaning like the main or the chief or the principal or the primary. Or we can also think of it of having or exerting control or power. In that case, we're talking about like superior. So it can be used in either sense, meaning the most common or the central or just the thing that stands out, or we can think of it as the most powerful as well. So our next one here is prerequisite, and prerequisite is a noun. You can't take Spanish literature 1 unless you've taken the prerequisite, Spanish 3. Since she was allergic to cigarette smokes, Kaylin told Troy that his quitting smoking was a prerequisite for their marrying. So a prerequisite means a requirement. And if you think of it, the two parts of it, we have pre, which means before, and requisite, which comes from require. So it's something that you require before something else. So in the first example, the before you can take Spanish literature, the thing you're required to do is take Spanish 3. In the second example, before they can get married, the thing he's going to have to do is quit smoking. So a prerequisite is a thing that's required as a prior condition for something else to happen or for something else to exist. All right, and here we are. Our last one here is recession, and this one's a noun, and the SION tells us that. While seashore businesses in the north suffer a recession in the winter, they do very well from spring to fall. The department store laid off 20 workers during the recession, but it rehired them when business improved. So recession is an economic setback. Recession comes from the word recede, and recede means to pull back from the normal position, from where it started or where it should be. So when we talk about a recession, what we're talking about normally is a slow pullback from a high, not necessarily a high level, but an acceptable level for the economy. So right now, whatever, here in 2016, we're towards the end of what people are calling the Great Recession, which happened after 2008, when there was a big housing bubble and the economy crashed and people lost a lot of money. There was also the Great Recession in the early part of the century, where stocks really dropped. But a recession is marked by the fact that it's a temporary economic decline, and during that time the trade and industrial activity are reduced, and generally it means that the economy as a whole for the country goes down, and people lose their jobs. So it's not a happy time. But a recession recession means that it's going to come back. I mean, that's what you hope, is that it does come back. So we say it's a setback. It's not an end. It's as we'd say, a bump in the road. All right, so go ahead and do either the online activities or the activities in the book. Pardon me. And then do the questions, and then bring any questions that you have to class, so we can go over those before we take the quiz. All right, take care. See you in class. Bye.